Welcome to another video on game development with Asha Akanksha Foundation. So in today's video, we'll fix the UI and we'll replace the different elements on the screen, the cameras and the panels. So we'll adjust them to make the UI more uh, pretty, and we will also add a timer to the UI which will show how much time has elapsed since the beginning of the racing game. So once a player completes the race, that timer would pause for that player while it keeps running for the other player. Also, we will create a new finish line, which will on touching which the user's game would end. We'll start by first fixing this scene. So we can see that this camera is taking up a lot of space for the first player, and that is a problem for us. So what we'll do is simply scale the camera down to half firstly, and the second thing we want to do is simply shift these screens, the cameras, the player screens a little bit to the right. For that, we'll first shift it by 0.15 and decrease the width as well to ensure that both the screens get an equal space and this area is also left out. So we left out 0.15 area here, a 0.15 length here. The whole length is 1. So simply just divide it by 2 to get divide the remaining by 2 to get 0.425. And similarly, for the other camera, we'll make the width as 0.425, and we want the x to be uh, basically 0.425 plus 0.15, which is 0.475 575, sorry. Yeah, so that's how we want it. Now the second thing we want is to have a UI component here, a UI panel that will show us some options. Firstly, we want to make it completely um, trans opaque instead of having it to be transparent. And secondly, um, let's just have a nice light color. Secondly, we need to send this to the back, and that is something we'll do. So right now it's on the UI layer. We'll change it to default, and then sort order, we'll mark it as -5. That's not, 1 second. So what we'll do is simply scale this down a little bit. So we want the length to be 0.15 and the height to be 0.75. Also, we want it to be at the top, so we need to add some offset. That's going to be half of 0.75, which is 0.125. Sorry, I added it in the rotation, but we want it to be at the pivot. So it's currently at 0.5, and we'll first make the x as 0, change the left and right to be 0 as well. Now we'll change the y. So right now it's at 0.5. I want it to be at 0.375. Remove the top and bottom. So it didn't get changed very much. 0.625, sorry. I shifted it downwards. But that's also not changing it very much. So we'll have to change it manually a little bit. Right. So basically, we wanted to start at exactly 1. Yeah, so that's how it works. Now for the other part, basically now we're going to add some buttons here to pause the game, or uh, any other options that we want to end the game, etc. So that's what those kinds of options can be added on this panel, and the game will proceed normally for the players on the sides. Now let's start with creating a final ends. So here, if we are at these cars, first we'll disable the pointer so that it doesn't disturb us. Now what we want is, right now the cars, if you see the top view, we want the cars to reach, go around the whole place and reach the final destination, which is also exactly at the start point. So that is going to be a little tricky for us to manage, because that means that the players can move in the opposite direction and go to the start, which is not what we want. So what we're going to do now is simply add these simply break this region. Instead of allowing the you basically instead of having a flat region here, we're going to add some um, raised region. So at exactly this position, we'll get the terrain options. Here in paint, we want to raise or lower terrain. Just press on this region to raise it a little bit. We'll get a better view from that region itself. Right. So now that's where the cars were. We raised it a little too much. So that's what we want to raise. Let me get the top view again. Even now it's pretty easy for the cars to travel, so we'll raise it a little more. Make sure there's no path. Okay, so this is fine. We finally blocked this area for the player. We also undo the paints that we did for the player, for the path, and that is going to happen by when we go to paint textures and select the second layer. So if we shift, I'm hoping shift and that part would basically erase those regions for us. Okay, no. So we'll paint the first layer back. That should be fine. So that this is where we'll end the game, and let's just paint these regions out as well. So we need to paint it with the second layer. This is the part that we left out earlier. It'll take a second. We don't need to be very neat. Can decrease the brush size now. Still too high. Okay, so this is fine. Let's just paint a little bit here. Okay, so we need to start from here, and that's our end position. So that's the whole map. Let's, okay, so that should be fine. Now what we want to do is add a finish line here. So to create the finish line, we can do anything from either importing some nice widget from the Unity store, or simply using some other feature, some other a simple box or anything. Right now I'll go with a box. You can import any widgets you already know how to import assets. So we'll go to the finish line first. Right, so that's our finish line. We'll need to rotate the camera a little bit. So this is where we're going to end the game. We can end it at this spot, this line. Now I just want to add a red strip here on the crown. I can simply do that by using a cuboid. A 3D shape cube would be fine. So instead of, I want it to be placed exactly here, and I don't want to mess this part up. So for that, what I'll do is I'll simply open the project and go to my, so just simply create an asset, a prefab for it, and drag it up here. Yeah, that's fine. The position is fine. I think I can bring it to the front. Now we need to just scale this up. Go to the inspector, increase the width to, sorry, the width, the z-axis to 10. Make y can be 0 because we can have it to be flat. Z should be a little more, 40 would be fine. So that's our end line. It should be a little tilted over the y-axis, about 15. We can have little height, it's not a problem, but it would be good to have a very small height. Probably even have the height over here 1 and have point 1 to be the x coordinate. So that's going to be something like a banner. Shift this, so shift our cube a little bit, cuboid. We can raise it and color it red. So go to the project, here in the materials we have the red color, apply it. That can be our finish line. We can add other like the stands here, but that should be fine. So once the car touches this line, we it would be a game end for us. So for that we first need to ensure that the car height and the um, object height, the this banner height is similar. After that we need to add a collider to this banner. So we'll go to the cube and check out if it already has, so it has a box collider already, and we'll mark it as is triggered, as we all know that once this once the collider would be triggered we'll be notified. Now what we want is to add a script to this file to ensure that when the car touches this banner, we pause the time for the car. So for that, firstly, we need to track the time for the car. So we'll go to the player controller script, and here we'll add a variable for current time, or it just can be a simple int. And what we need to do is start time can be tracked. In general, start time is always the 0. So if you call the function time.time, start time is always 0. So like when the scene starts, the time is always 0, but we might want to add some 3 to 1 or some delay in the start, so that's not what we're going to rely on. We're going to use the start time. uh, we're going to call this function at the start, and at any point current time, which current time would be time.time minus, sorry, time.time minus start time. So we'll just make this current time to be public to ensure that this is visible outside. Now we'll also update the UI on that. So we'll first have to add a UI element to show the time on the game. But let's just wait for a second. Right, so first we need to add a UI element, and we'll use a text mesh pro for that. Importing might take a second. Right. So here we'll rename this to player one time. Player one time, and we'll add a similar. So first let's just add some text here. Yeah, that's where it is. You can drag and drop it to position it properly. That's where it is. We need it to be at the corner. I think that would place it right. And we'll add just 00.00, so it will show the seconds as well as the minutes. It would be great to have a small block background, so we can add a panel, and that can be I'd like it to be translucent because we'll allow the user to see the backdrop, but the size needs to be decreased for sure. So that is here. We'll decrease it to 0.1, cross 0.1. I can't really spot the, so let me just increase it to 1. So it's, yeah, it's somewhere around here. Go back to the scene right here. Just place it over the text and select the time. Place the time in the center as well. Yeah, this seems fine. We can increase the font size a little bit. It can be bold. Center again. Yeah, this is perfect. I'll group this as a, so I'll create an empty object and name it player one timer. We'll duplicate this or probably prefab it. We haven't created any prefabs for this project, so I think prefab would be a good idea. Rename the prefab to player timer. Use the same prefab for the other player. Okay, we can just delete this one. So in the screen we'll have this, in the canvas we'll have one player timer, the second player timer, So all we need to do is simply drag this element, shift it to the right place. Okay, it got mixed. One second. Yeah, this is fine. A little at the top. For the other one too. Perfect. Okay, so this is fine. Now in the next videos, we'll see how we'll update the timer and link it. The console shows a small error in the code that we had written. It shows that we used integer instead of float. So time is tracked to milliseconds. So we would want to use float for that purpose. And again, functions. This is a static field, so it is it's supposed to be small, but here we've used a capital one. I meant not static, but basically it's an attribute and not a function. Also, current time would be float. Now let's check out the time section of the inspector. So yeah, the time is increasing every second. So that seems fine. Now what we want to do is we want to link this text to the timer. So there's a reason why we set the name of the timer to be prefixed by the player's name. So player one time will ensure that when we are at player one, we can simply add the word time to the name of the game object to fetch the time text mesh pro component. So we'll rename this part as well. So this is going to be player two. Now we go to player one script. So we need to update the timer, and for that we need to first have the timer object with us. So we'll store the text mesh pro component pro UGUI, that's the class name, and this is the timer. Where do we fetch the timer from? We first need to get the game object, and for that we need to do game object dot find. Name of the game object will be our current game object is this small letter this game object, and we need to get the name plus time. That will give us the game object of the text mesh pro game object. Now from that we need to fetch the this so every game object has different components, and we want the So if you go to the inspector, we want this component because this is the one that stores the text. And that's what we're going to do now. Now, in order to use Text Mesh Pro in code, we need to use this import using TM Pro, and that would be fine. We'll have the timer here with us. The next step is to update the timer, and that's something that we'll do here. Oh, I think we have this current time is equal to uh, time dot, sorry, time, it auto corrects, dot dot time minus start time. Now we'll calculate the seconds, sorry, minutes. Int minutes is equal to current time divided by 60, and we need to explicitly convert it to int, and we want int seconds, that would be current time minus 60 into minutes, just as an integer. That's all we want. We'll update the timer. So timer dot text is equal to minutes dot toString plus the colon plus seconds dot toString. So later you can on your own also you can write the logic to code out the part that if there's only one digit, you add an extra zero in the beginning, so that will ensure that uh, this is the format of time that you follow. But right now, just to show you how things work, this should be enough. Yeah, the console is fine. Let's start. Okay, so the timer is getting updated. Now we also need to make sure that the timer pauses when we reach the end of the game, which is, as you know, at the final um, cuboid that we had created. So that's the cube, that's the game end. That this line determines, so whichever card reaches, whenever the card touches this region, we'll pause the timer. Right, so this is perfect. So in this video, we refined our game to a very good extent. We also added new features like the timer and the finish line, which leads to our game to a sort of a completion stage. And in future videos, we'll just clean up the game a little bit, add some other cases, and we will just finalize the game. So we're nearing the end of project 2, and I really hope you're enjoying this series.